I just have to come back to where I left off. The purpose of this system, which I was describing to Trish earlier, is, as I said in the last video, to transmit ideas which are considered undescritizable. That is, the information that exists within a system is serialized on the way in, and then it becomes parameters within the system, data stored in various ways. One of the ways of storing data is with neural networks. It's one of the key aspects of this system. But that is to come. That's more advanced stuff. At the moment, there's just what I outlined with Trish, which is highly related to the modularization of ideas into stacks of different ideas. So this okay, so now, as I was saying, you have a worldview, which is at M. It's your worldview. You are me, you are M. And your worldview has at least one layer to it. That's the N1 layer, or N. And then if you want to add another layer to your worldview, then you can connect it up via a cable, I guess. That's a good way to think of it. And that was then your N2, your first degree of separation from N1. Now, of course, you can break this down further, but instead of doing it inside this box, I have it so that it's done, I have it so that it's done in kind of a circuit-like fashion. So the way I see it is, you're trying to work out from your worldview something, or you're trying to know something. I always need to come back to that terminology. You're trying to know something, and what you want to know is green over here. This is the concept of green. So I want to know that. So I send it out there that I want to know it, I guess. And that's these little types of arrows, these little small arrowheads. And then here we have what I kind of know already is there. And then there are other things that I know, and they're also in the circuit. But as I mentioned, it's a circuit. So the fundamental idea, and I do say hierarchy, but I really just mean order of events. So, you know, often it'll be like, oh, what's the first thing that came into your mind? Well, in a sense, I'm trying to get below that level. So I'm trying to say, when you have an association, and this is where I get to this other graph, I think. I will go off and just describe that in a minute as well. Mnemonic series. This is essentially what I'm talking about, but I do need the Dennett picture, so I'll go back to another whiteboard just quickly, which is here. Okay, so I haven't discussed this with Trish yet, but I guess I'll do that. So this is something that was put up on during a presentation by Daniel Dennett at UNSW in, I think it was 2017. Oh, no, 2018. Anyway, not relevant. And this is his idea of consciousness, that he will sort of, that's how he gets towards his idea of consciousness. So we have this person here, excuse me, person who's looking at a piece of art, and there's all the things that are coming into their head. And it's quite nice because some of them are, you know, lovely drawings and associations and things like that. I think they're getting at something pretty deep there. So this is a lot of literature that's related to that. And then I read this book and this book, some of these books, and there's various ideas that emerged from those books. Then I came up with this mnemonics theory, which is what I've been describing in the last video and a lot of videos I've been doing recently. So a mnemonic is something to help you remember something. So we're talking about an idea, a thought in the mind, which is comprised of layers of memory, I guess memories, represented. They're not really necessarily memories, they're sort of sub-memories. They're like synaptic connections, and I'm not trying to refer to the biological system there. I'm trying to just refer to the metaphor that mnemonics uses. So these are various ideas from linguistics. Excuse me, sorry, no, this is mnemonics. In linguistics, you do have a concept of, what have I done here? Yeah, I see. So I've summarized this a little bit. In linguistics, you have a concept of the morpheme and the phoneme. The phoneme is the smallest units of sound. So if you see phonetic notation, then you see these little symbols which represent how to pronounce a word. And there's also the idea of a morpheme, which is the smallest unit of meaning. And this is strongly related to the notion of the sign. So a lot of people like to think of music as being made up of a bunch of symbols. And I'm saying it's not. I'm saying it's partially made up by symbols, it's partially made up by sound, these two things. But there's an additional layer of meaning. And that layer of meaning, it can be represented in a graph, broken down further using this mnemonic notation. So what I was just talking about there was we're at our worldview M. Sorry, yeah, M. We, me. I'm at my worldview M. That's really what I mean. I'm at my worldview M, and there is an N1 or an N state. So it's the most fundamental thought form. Let's call it a thought form. Most fundamental thought form. That is separated by a distance of N1 to a second order mnemonic, N2. And this is another layer of that thought form. So you've got the first layer, second layer of the third form goes on top, thought form goes on top of that layer. And then that thought form is connected to this thought form, which is a third order, right? But at the same time, it's connected back to the fundamental thought form. And this is just showing a very small mnemonic, but it's these could be as big as or as little as you wanted. I guess I should probably say that this is a simple mnemonic. It's not a very complex mnemonic. Right, so we'll check this. Okay, so and so on and so forth. And this is fairly similar to how you describe chords in stick and slur theory and the harmonic analysis, which is offered at City Conservatorium. I just can't be bothered thinking of who that's by right this very second, but anyway. So you have this kind of slur notation, but I'm using arrows, and this is a bit inspired by category theory in mathematics as well. So you're having your first order, second order, third order, and fourth order. These are all connected up, interconnected in every way. They're all mutually mapped. So as you can see that the first order is connected to the second order, third order, and fourth order independently. And the second order is connected to the first order, third order, fourth order independently. So it doesn't matter where you are in the mnemonic. But perspective M preferences this as the first order. So I'll just continue on down the diagram. So you can see that there are distances there. So this is how far these things are removed from one another within this mnemonic. This isn't to say that they're mapped. They're not mapped to other mnemonics, right? This particular mnemonic, this is how it's mapped. And so I have, and I said there's something about how size isn't really an issue here. And this is like a gene. So these mappings, these interrelated mappings, they form a unit, which can be, we're choosing to describe it as a unit, a mnemonic. Sorry, not a mnemonic, a mnum. Now, that could represent something as simple as the note A on a piano. Now, while the A does have, when we press down the key and we have a microphone recording it, or our ear is hearing it, then we do end up with stuff that's like the phonemic information. If it's somebody singing a word as part of a song at A, then that's also morphemic in nature. So then you end up with the usual assumption that music is made up of songs, essentially, which is sort of true for some stuff. And this concept is about splitting that up a little bit further, but essentially imagine that this is our musical note and it's an A, but it's on the piano. We press the A button, and I'm saying that for each harmonic in that harmonic series, there's theoretically associations interrelated between that harmonic and what I call, well, I was originally calling them cultural references, but the idea is that you can have self-oscillation within one of these systems. So if your brain lights up, say this little mnemonic starts happening, this relationship more than the other ones, and this is just from hearing the A, maybe you hear the A and it's followed by another one, whatever it is, then inadvertently your mind is querying this, and then this has a certain, it's really hard to use existing terminology for this stuff, but I've been calling these shades. I think that's a pretty nice term, so I'll write that here. Shades. So shades within the mnemonic. Mnemonic. So yeah, I mean, the shades are N1, N2, N3, etc. Right? These are these different shades or layers. Let's call them layers as well, shades and layers. And you can kind of imagine them as being in a little stack. Just do this. Okay. Right. So here we have our mnemonic. Oh, and yeah, this is important too. So I was talking about the arrow of time in the previous video. So this is our z-axis, and then nested in the z-axis is all these different dimensions. So if you can imagine that there is an infinite potential for, when I say infinite potential, like just whatever, interpret that how you want, but theoretically infinite potential for how these things could all be interrelated. And if we have, loads and loads of these mnemonics all interrelated and interconnected in various ways, and they all represent like individual notions or ideas made up of shades, and they're all shades of each other, and so on and so forth. They're all sort of essentially the same thing layered together. This is our sort of infinite dimensions of embedded meaning kind of layer. So we're talking about metadata and all that kind of stuff being here. If we're talking about a computer system, the arrow of time is what moves forward through this. So this is sort of like what's right in front of our face, and we keep moving through this according to that principle of the arrow of time, which is that we're constantly in motion. So this is a cross section of what I call a standard mnemonic series. So the standard mnemonic series is this sort of pure looking thing. It's theoretical. It's probably, you could construct mnemonics out of this artificially. I mean, it's all artificially constructed, but yeah, this is the most fundamental way of explaining it. I'm still struggling with a lot of terminology here, but getting there. And yeah, so then my idea eventually, and the mnemonic name sort of says it all, mnemonic, is this is a way of remembering things. So we could, train a neural network with that idea. And yeah, that would be a way of storing the idea at an idea level. So let's go back to our other board. So if we go back to our other board here, just check what else we've got in here I might need to cover. No, it should be fine. So this is tablar mneumonikos. This is what I've been talking about. I did mention before quite a lot about this diagram and idea and how that all comes into being, but really important is the references back to, I guess, if I'm going to actually be doing this properly, I should probably be shutting thesis into this board. But anyway, so the ancient Greek origin of the word mneum, which is the medieval name for a note, is essentially the Greek, bunch of Greek terminology for breath, spirit of life, all this kind of stuff, and it comes and the wind and even flatulence and all sorts of things, but it's got all these connotations. The root word, the etymology, but also there's something divine about it, something godly about a pneum, and yeah, it turns out that particular philosopher whose name escapes me right now, he was basically really into describing the world in a similar way to how I'm doing it now, but the idea was that air was kind of the most fundamental element. So breath is very, very important in that idea. But eventually we do end up with a musical unit, fundamental unit, which refers to God, and it makes sense there. So this is where we were. We were looking at us at the worldview point M. I'm trying to click on, there it is. And we've queried this mnemonic. And we haven't queried it, sorry. We know this mnemonic. We know it. This is a little arrow showing that we know this. And then this big arrow here, I'm just introducing these flat-backed block arrows. They are in fact a termination point for the idea of green in this case. I think we've now changed it, so we're discussing this idea of A, which is just as valid as X. I can do that as well. Right. I can be discussing A440 instead of discussing, what's this? I seem to have ended up with that instead. Okay. So I want to try that again. Copy. Yeah, there it is. Okay, that's just to remind myself. There we go. So we can end up with this as well. A440 could be there. So we could send that to the back if we don't want to use it. Forward, send backward, up. Right, so they're both completely valid ways of looking at it. So right now we're looking at A440. It's the note being played on the piano. And I hear the note, and I immediately know something about the note. So in this case, let's say we know that it's being played by a piano. How do we know that? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons we know that. And one of them could be the knowledge of this. So this is where I'm getting to the point where these aggregate. So if I have the knowledge of this and this, then this worldview is going to terminate, or this, I guess, end state, I keep calling them. This end state's going to terminate to my worldview. Now, this is really, really useful having it described like this, because now what we can do, I'm just going to go back to talking about green. I just thought it was really interesting to talk about in relationship to music, just because this is green here, but it could easily be that like there's one of these for an A on a piano and there's another one for an A on a guitar, and this is just a way of graphing that, of how you structure the thinking around knowing these different things, because this is a knowledge-based storage system, neural network that is used as a memory register. So we have an S and we have an S2 over here. There are the sapiens, right? And so there are the things that know things. This is an A. It's like an artificial neural network or an animal, some other kind of thing, but it's not, doesn't work like a sapien. A sapien has theory of mind and consciousness. So, I mean, consciousness is the slippery term. Theory of mind, we're staying with that. Okay, worldview here. Now, this is where it gets interesting. We're going to go back to talking about green, because the diagram's really like focused on describing what M thinks of green. So M knows that this sapien, S, and maybe this is Donald Trump, has tweeted the word green in inverted commas, and then the color of the text was this, right? It was that color. So they know this. They know of S as well. So they know where they got this information from. Okay, so then there's an informational cascade. So that idea cascades to M. And then there's a further informational cascade, which goes from S and to S2. Now I'll get to S and S2 and how they think in a second. Now these arrowheads, they denote how things terminate. So just like when we looked at that standard mnemonic series, we saw that everything was connected back to the fundamental end state, which is their the fundamental of their mnemonic series, the end state. And because we're querying this idea of X, which is a memeplex. Now, a memeplex is a system that is influenced by a number of different sapiens. So while we have, or ANNs or whatever, there's some components that are like these kind of things, but it's basically a knowledge storage system. So if we have at X the concept of green, and then we have at S and S2 the concept of green, and we have at M we have the concept of green, then these different sapiens all know X. Right? They don't know of X, they know X because of their own ways that they query the idea of S. And one of those ways is to look beyond yourself. M has this knowledge of S's tweet, but M does not have knowledge of, S does not have knowledge of M, right? And S has knowledge of another S though, S2. And S2 and S are interrelated along this pathway here. What this shows us is in fact that this particular knowledge of the color green is terminated down from this X. I've colored it just to illustrate what's going on there. So this is a channel going from the concept of X to S, and that's this particular color green. But let's say that for whatever reason this tweet used this shade of green, doesn't matter what the reason is, that's the communication that came from S, and they're not aware of each other. However, because this color green was chosen by S, or is known by S to be green, that is communicated to S2. And you can imagine that this is maybe done via a text message, let's say. And S has sent a text message saying green is this color, and they've sent this color. And so they're in agreement on that, right? Because you can see that S2 knows S, and S knows S2, and that X is in agreement, or that their interpretation of X is in agreement. Now, this can't just happen without there being a relationship between S2 and X. Otherwise, it would just be that S2 knows this from here. Okay, and that wouldn't be much of a kind of feedback network. Although, so what instead is going on here is that there is a law L located at this point, and that law is comprised of two different. Sorry, what have I done? Okay, so S2 and S both know L. They know. It's not that they have heard of L or they have seen L. They know L. So they know that L, which is RGB 02550, this HTML code here, they know that is this green. They know that. And so because they're in agreement on that, and because they're in agreement on this, then we do have a situation where these two sapiens have the exact same, or more or less same, and this is again hypothetical, theoretical, knowledge of X. So they're in agreement on X, you can say. M, however, I'm not in agreement on X because I don't have access to this law, because maybe I can't read, or maybe I don't know enough about HTML or physics or any of those things. Maybe I'm blind. There could be all sorts of things going on there. Maybe my apparatus for seeing is working differently and whatnot. So I end up coming up with my own worldview because I have to do it on my own. I'm on my own here at M. There aren't any other M's around, so I'm going to have to just come up with how I want to understand X, or how I know X. I need to work out how I know X, or what X is. I need to work out X. I need to know X. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm trying to know X. So what else do I have to go on? Okay, so I do have N2. Now N2 in this hypothetical is this particular color. And I've decided that that is what I know of X. And so that means that X is terminating that color green to me. Great, good for you, X. Well done. Now, I'm in this world space. Now I'm calling it a world space. It's really a meme space. I'm trying to avoid the mimetic terminology because it's taken on new meaning in most other spheres. But anyway, it's really just a meme space where this meme exists, the memeplex X. So I also have this fundamental arrow returning to me. It's terminating from X. It's just the fact that I know X, not that I know X to be. So this fundamental, this is the N, right? This is the end state. Not the end state, sorry, this is the fundamental, the N. So while there's an N1, N2, N3, and so on and so forth that make up the mnemonic N at M, the mnemonic N1 at M, excuse me, N at M, yeah, that's a direct connection to X. I'll outline this a little bit more detail in another video, actually. So the very last couple of things. I think I'll go back to what I was talking to Trish about because I'm getting crossed over into a different video where I've already explained all this. Okay, so we're up to communication, talking with Trish. There's a difference between when you dance for yourself and when you dance for others, okay? So that was a communication that Trish made in terms of yeah, that was to do with movement. When other people are not engaged in the same process, but we're viewing it from the outside. So that's what. So Trish, when she made that statement, she was talking about someone viewing and watching dance, watching movement, watching some movement. It's a group of people moving. It's a different thing. There's one person moving, someone's watching that person. That's another thing. Okay, so there's that. There's that, and she mentioned the term gravity. So gravity is interacting with Trish when she moves, and she's feeling that gravity take her places, and she's reacting mimetically. We did mention the idea of decomposition as well. So decomposition being, I decided not to. We haven't talked about this yet, and we're due to meet in 40 minutes. Maybe we'll talk about it. So decomposition being when not decomposing an idea, but Trish was just talking about like a piece of wood decomposing. That just happened in that conversation. That's what I'm saying about that. I like that because this is sort of decomposition, we're sort of decomposing X. So you can imagine if you were to remove any of these links, it would be sort of like memory loss or something within the system breaks. And then that would end up in a state of a collapse of failure of actually called work this. Yeah, okay. So if I'm doing a study in the aesthetics of failure, that's what this would be if I cut out all these little things. And that's incidentally, that idea is sort of related to the idea that if we study the human brain or the brain in general or anything in science, we look at the broken stuff. And let's just know how the other stuff's working. So I had a performance piece in Hamburg, which surprisingly didn't get received very well, but essentially this is the notion. So I'm on stage and I have a system and I have rules, systematic rules for how I'm going to break the system. And the only person that knows this is me. And then on the stage you have some other sapiens who are doing various things related to what I'm doing. There's kind of a communication framework. Remember, this is X and Y. So arrow of time goes across the Z-axis. That's what's different about this. So this is a slice, and the arrow of time. Sorry, this is the Z-axis. Excuse me. This is the z-axis, of course. The arrow time moves along the x as you would expect traditionally, and then the y is then something else. It's not in this graph. Anyway, we won't talk about y right now. But as this system then interacts and I break these things, I break down the different pieces of communication that are happening on the stage. And in that particular piece, there was a very talented percussionist who was playing a piano on the inside of the piano, which is particularly relevant because immediately you've broken something, you've taken a percussionist and you've gotten them to learn an entirely new way of playing a different instrument. So what I did was I got Lin Chen into the room and I said, okay, we're going to do a piece and it's going to be done using an audio score. So that's all we had. We had the audio. And incidentally, the audio score was something that, it was a patch actually, and I generated a few different audio scores and then we went with those ones. And then I think if I did this piece again, I might be a little bit more poetic with how I expressed the notion of how I was going to break it on stage. But in any case, this is what happened. It's a little bit of both anyway. But so then we had this audio score, and Lynn practices multiple times with that audio score. But the way that she relates to the audio score is direct. It's mimetic. So there were different. So there's some video on the stage. There was a video, and the video was of a young woman, and she was reciting some nonsense phrases using Chinese. Those nonsense phrases were also incidentally generated by a neural network. So this is very much a process of randomness. And then Lin Chen was using a talking drum. Unfortunately, in the performance, it didn't quite work out, but the talking drum was supposed to be there, and she then mimetically impersonates what's happening with the talking drum on the screen, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that would be an appropriate way to do that. In particular, the fact of that tonal languages, you have more incidents of people with perfect pitch, and then there's a question there about the piano being tuned to perfect, to equal temperament, having this fixed tuning, and the fact that there's this relationship there. This is from Diana Deutsch's book, but if you don't have perfect pitch, it's just because you've lost it. Apparently, we were all born with perfect pitch, according to her. And then in countries where there are tonal languages spoken, more people have perfect pitch. Incidentally, my partner has perfect pitch, and she's never done any musical training, and we found that out through working with the system that was used, in fact, to generate parts of that piece. So that is an interesting angle to it as well. And so basically there's Lynn, there's me on the stage, and I'm connected up to all this equipment and all these concepts and whatnot, and all my own stuff in the Max Patch, and I have a system by which I have to break those connections. And Lynn has some instructions on how to react, but she doesn't know that it's going to break. So she does the talking drum, and then she's over to the piano, and then because the talking has stopped at the screen, she knows that if the video stops, then over. If the video comes back, then back over there. So she walks over to the piano, and then I start the audio score. The audio score worked, and it was the score that we'd performed and practiced with. She then impersonates that inside the piano. So then there's like a multi-channel thing going on, but then I react to other things that are happening. So basically reacting back to her. So there's this kind of relationship back and forth, right? And then that then leads me to perform certain actions to access then videos and various things, which then end up on the stage. And so that's kind of the collapse of that aesthetic. So that's the aesthetics of failure, and that's anti-mimetics. So it's like the idea that we break down this system, and it's a commentary on the way that art theory has been very, very influential in the way the world works now because of multimedia, the way that hyperlinks and Wikipedia have emerged, and the fact that everybody's able to use translator services now. Also, the audio scores are generated using machine learning algorithms, which have learned how to impersonate people's speech and accents and things like that. And those machine learning algorithms, which have generated the speech, really amazing. Like it sounds like. It's really cool. They're really cool accents, basically. So you're working with an accent, but then also, I just had piles of lyrics, you could call them, which were completely put together using neural networks, which were trained on a whole massive swath of academic papers, and all sorts of stuff. And this is all related back to the idea of X, right? So I started off with whatever concept it was, right? So if you say, A440 is the concept, right? And you're going to explain what A440 is. Well, that's definitely, that could be a whole book. That's a huge idea. So if you're going to do that, then you start down this path. Now, what I'm trying to say is in the world today, we're seeing a lot more breakdown of these things, a lot more stuff going on. We're also seeing a lot of resonance happening in the system, the larger worldwide, the WW memetics, something, the worldwide memetic system, where all the memeplexes are all connecting up in a more explicit way. So more of this information becomes known to more M world viewpoints. And you get more of this consensus type stuff happening. So we're moving beyond just a simple symbolic language here. We've now added in things like color and sound and all sorts of stuff, extra sensorial stuff even, it's all there. And so then this stuff can then be used to commit what I call meme manipulation, which is dangerous stuff. That's using like disinformation and things like that. So it's an exploration of all that. Obviously, there's obvious connotations of using Chinese language there, a Chinese performer and a Chinese dancer who's doing a lot of traditional dance and that as well. So it's a very, very interesting piece that didn't work live, but I think all those concepts there are a pretty good explanation of what this is, essentially, what a mnemonic is, what the standard mnemonic series is, and how you can use that stuff to compose. And now that I'm in using this with a dancer, I'm able to break down my own thoughts, I guess, a lot better and communicate them. And if I am to then do something that uses, the way I work, which is using max patches and all sorts of technology and stuff like that, I can then create these nodes where people kind of interconnect within the idea. That's what this represents. So this is a connection to another meme space. So, the concept of why. So actually, here we go. That's another meme space. Cool. Okay. And now I've said, so there's something about the meaning of X, which connects X to A440, right? And this is now another meme space over here. Move that one out of the way. So A440, interesting. What is A440? This is another meme space. And you can just keep creating these things. Oops. Oh, actually, that's probably not so bad. And let's put that in its own little frame so we know that it's a world space. Right. Oh, big one. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good explanation so far of this concept. I think it's going to be fruitful. Looking forward to meeting Trish in half an hour.